Welcome to the Dawkins Guide to Vampires. You know, the Dawkins Guide to Vampires is slightly distinct from the Gentleman's Guide to Vampires. After all, I'm clearly not the same character. My range is so deep. I know sometimes it's difficult to tell because the nuance is so fine, the subtleties between characters. But nevertheless, the Dawkins Guide to Vampires is a slightly different animal because the Dawkins Guide to Vampires emerges off the back of my Patreon, which is linked in the description below, patreon.com/Matthew Dawkins, where you can request videos are made. And I've got a few queued up. This one relates to the Inconu, and hello to people who are watching. All of you lovely aspirational neonates. This one was requested of me by a fledgling with many dots in generation by the name of Daniel. And it was very kind of him to make the request, back the Patreon, send this lowly ancilla such as myself a little bit of money to put me on my way and fund my research into the Inconnu. I should also mention, and the reason I'm going to mention this isn't through any personal gain, as I earn nothing from it. There is a Kickstarter going on right now that is very exciting to me for Scion Dragon and Scion Masks of the Mythos, which blends, well, they're two different games, but you've got the best of fantasy and the best of horror in two separate games as part of the wonderful Scion RPG. Obviously, dragons, Call of Cthulhu. Who doesn't love those things? Well, you can find a link to that Kickstarter below. There's only a week left at time of recording, so please do check it out. I think you will agree the art alone is fantastic, and you can read the entire manuscript by backing the Kickstarter, even at the lowest amount. All that said, let's talk about the Inconnu, shall we? The Inconnu are, without doubt, Neonate, the most mysterious of sects, or at least you would think that. You would be told that by most any kindred that's heard of the Inconnu, that they are, by definition, mysterious, so that they are unknown. And because of this, well, they kind of become less unknown, don't they? It's a little like mortals running around saying the Illuminati control everything in the background. Well, if kindred are running around saying the Inconnu do the same, can the Inconnu exist to any degree as the Illuminati do, or vice versa? To put it another way, perhaps they just don't. Perhaps they're just shadows on the wall, figments of our imaginations, as if we don't already have enough things to terrify us during our day sleep. But there is evidence to suggest that the Inconnu do exist in our world, that they do manipulate some things in the background, that they do observe, like strange voyeurs hidden in closets. They love to peep through the slats as we call out for our mummies and feed on our victims. But they never intervene. This is the principle of the Inconnu. If they have any kind of code, any kind of system, it is that they are not to intervene, not to involve themselves in the jihad. Therefore, the Inconnu will never support the Camarilla, they will never support the Anarch movement, they will never support the Sabbat, because that is seen as the eternal struggle. The Inconnu consider themselves above such petty feuding. Politics is beneath them. They are a sect of philosophy, of knowledge, of enlightenment. Now, it's, again, very easy to say this. Anyone who considers themselves a scholar or a philosopher, especially of a Canaanite variety, is going to start holding themselves on a higher plane than the prince who's squabbling over this block or that. But when it comes to the Inconnu, again, they have some weight to their claims. They have, after all, existed for a very long time, and without much in the way of assailment that hasn't been brought on by themselves. They haven't put a target on themselves. There aren't any Camarilla princes I'm aware of who have said, we must drive the Inconnu out of our domain. And likewise, the Sabbat have never waged a crusade against the Inconnu, unless incidentally a member of the Inconnu, by virtue of their age, has been caught up in said crusade. So what do they do? What is their purpose? Where do they come from? Well, Obviously, as is always the case among we kindred, the Inconu origin story is muddy. You could have it traced all the way to the Etruscan time, or even ancient Rome, or a cross between the two, with kindred scholars generally believed to be of clans Ventru, Malkavian, La Sombra coming together. Sometimes the Salubria thrown in there. Do you remember them? You know, those poor little lambs. They would come together and they would philosophize and they would try to push the Cainite condition to a higher plane. Now, I've spoken on Golconda before, and the idea that, in one respect, Golconda is the absolutely most virtuous philosophy, path, if you like, that any kindred could take. The idea of becoming mortal again, the idea of divesting oneself of the curse of Cain, of at the very least a fear of fire and sunlight and ability to subsist without feeding so regularly. That seems honorable, doesn't it? And yet there's also the other view of Golconda, and that it does remove the curses, but it still allows you to remain a predator. You are still above mortality because you still have your disciplines, you still have the gifts of being undead, and in many ways immortal. You become cold and dead like a shark. You are unruffled by emotion, by compassion, because you have to maintain this solid, stolid course. And one could view the Inconu and their aims through similar lenses. You could say they are an honorable and compassionate sect because, no, they do not involve themselves in petty politicking, oh no, but they wish to refine themselves. They wish to make themselves the best vampires they can be. Well, the best vampire you can be is very much a subjective term, isn't it? It really depends on who your tutor is, the books you have been reading, and what your aspiration might be. Nevertheless, if we assume that the Inconu were present in ancient Rome, and as rumours hold that they steered the Roman Ventru and other clans into purging the Bruja Carthage because the Inconu were revulsed by the idea of vampires that sacrificed mortals and younger vampires to demons, as the propaganda goes, then the Inconu are virtuous, that they are worthy of respect. But we modern scholars know that ancient Rome, just because it bore the flag of civilization, wasn't some paragon of morality. It just so happened that in some aspects, technology, military-wise, they were more advanced along the scale, if you like. And so it allowed them to enforce their will on their neighbors who hadn't quite caught up to that standard. The Romans were also very good, and the Inconu as well, of arraying peoples against their enemies. So the Inconu rarely had to get involved, just as the Romans, if the Romans wished to conquer the Gauls, that great Celtic mass that is neither here nor there, according to whichever historian you ask, it's either hundreds of smaller tribes or three great nations or what have you. There could be millions, there could have been hundreds of thousands, we don't know. And there are very few Cainites around right now who wish to recall it. But the Romans rarely had to get involved in those kinds of border disputes when they wished to expand their border. They would just recruit one tribe to fight against another. So it went. The Inconu always did the same thing. There were no flag bearers for the sect. There were no kindred that went around with a third eye painted on their forehead saying, I am Inconu. No, they arrayed minions who either did so in supplication to the Inconu because they felt the Inconu were right, or the Inconu just manipulated people without their knowledge. And so you see, when the Inconu say, we are above the jihad, they are speaking very much selectively. They are still manipulators, they are still attempting to get something. It's just that they don't feel they are run-of-the-mill kindred. They believe they are above them. And again, there may be some merit. There may be some merit to this idea that they are above the pettiness of the rest of the way we politic. What happens after Rome, I hear you ask? Well, supposedly the Inconu festered around this period, or bloomed, if you wish to be generous, and because they had their own discrete philosophy over what vampires should become and what their involvement in mortality should be, when they saw what Michael of Constantinople and the Trinity, the Dream, the Triumvirate, call them what you wish, were imposing on that city, that Eastern Roman Empire, you can see jealousy rear its head. You can see how the Inconu could indeed be dragged into the kind of conflict that is so common among kindred, that yes, we may well declare we are better, we have a better path of enlightenment, we have a better school of thought, we know exactly what we want, and everything else is so beneath us. Yes, as we know, the Inconu declare this all the time. And then a rival civilization pops its head up. Constantinople, led by a very powerful Toreador and his Zimishi and Ventru lovers. And they appear and they say, well, we've got another way. We've got a way that actually allows us to be worshipped by the mortals, and everything seems to be running fairly smoothly over here. In fact, this is the best damn place a Canaanite could exist. You should spread our dream to other domains. What's more, let's build an entire church, an entire cult over it. Was it malevolent? That's a story for another lesson. But the Inconu certainly thought so, or certainly they said so, because the Inconu, they placed agents in Constantinople to disrupt it. The sabotage, what led to the fall of Constantinople, you may hear that it was jealousies between three lovers. You may hear that one of the three in the Trinity grew jaded, and the other two, one of them went mad trying to convince another to get back on the course, and another succumbed to ennui and decided to greet the sun because he was essentially bored and listless. Whatever the case. Others claim that the followers of Set, now known as the Ministry, as we know, were planted in the domain either by their own hierophants or by the Inconu, because the Inconu could not stand to see a rival. We are all of us hypocrites. There is no way around it. If you exist for thousands of years, you cannot help but backpedal on statements you've made and beliefs you claim to be fighting to defend. If you show me a vampire who has held to the same line for thousands of years, I will call you a liar, or you will be presenting to me the greatest paragon of Canaanite virtue, that it would force me to believe that there is no such thing as Golconda, for if such a vampire were to exist, surely they would have already attained it. Anyhow, the Inconu supposedly felt guilty after, ruining the dream of Constantinople and destroying the hopes of many a kindred, forcing them to greet the sun, in fact, because they had lost all optimism for what unlife might contain. So, what were the Inconu to do next? They dispersed. Supposedly, the elders of the Inconu, they holed up in a castle in Transylvania somewhere, Hunadawara, I believe it is sometimes called, and they left everyone else off to their own devices. What they were most interested in was monitoring other kindred, and interestingly, this was something they did around their foundation as well. They wished to learn through other people's mistakes, but again, with the edict, never get involved. And this time they were strict about it. If any vampire got involved in politics, they were to be cast out of the Inconu. That's not such a thing as having your membership taken away. It's usually you losing the head from your shoulders. If a vampire is suddenly found dead, and you had always thought this Canaanite never had any enemies, and they probably didn't, they always kept themselves, and there are signs of foul play, as there often are when a Canaanite is found dead, there's the possibility it was an Inconu gone rogue. Just quite possible. But the good Inconu, the Inconu who stick to the party line, they merge into kindred society. They watch other kindred. They don't join coteries as a general rule, unless it's coteries of dupes or fellow Inconnu agents, or monitors as they're sometimes called. And they watch other Canites. They watch other Canites flourish, and they watch other Canites make mistakes. More of the latter than the former. And they occasionally undergo pilgrimages to Hunadawara or wherever their elders happen to be in these nights, and they report back with stories of success and failure. Also, they can refine the process of becoming the ultimate beings. Again, do not be mistaken into thinking that just because this organization is discreet, and just because they are hidden, and just because they claim to be paragons of virtue means that they are. There are many atrocities that have occurred under the Inconnu watch, and they of course have said, well, because of our philosophy we cannot get involved. I do not just mean mortal atrocities. All of us have stood by and allowed those to happen. I mean among kindred. You look at the elimination of the Salubri, you look at the purge of the Cappadocians. Whether you regard either clan as anything worth saving is irrelevant to the fact that there will have been some kindred among those clans that were decent people, that were honourable, that were just fledglings who have been cursed with unlife. And the Inconnu, who supposedly know everything, watch everyone, monitor everything, have never got involved, at least not to my knowledge. And I have to ask the question, if the Inconnu have been getting involved and have been pushing things subtly one way or the other, driven by whatever sense of ethics they possess, I would say they're doing a pretty poor job, because in these nights we're facing down the Second Inquisition. Our elders are disappearing every single night. Clans have been broken up. Sects have changed irrevocably. Things are worse now than they were 20, 30 years ago by any measure. If this is the Inconnu's will, then they are a bunch of pricks. If they have left this to happen and not got involved, and they had the possibility of stopping it, they are also a bunch of pricks. Now, is there anything so dull as a personality who does not wish to impose itself and just wishes to watch as other kindred burn? You could say there's an element of sadism, a little bit of voyeurism to that, as I mentioned earlier. But I think there's more to it. I think the Inconnu are collecting something. They watch the survivors. They watch the kindred that do keep triumphing over diversity. And I think that the Inconnu were more influenced by some of their La Sombra founders than they let on. Remember, the La Sombra possess this philosophy of making their potential embraces go over burning coals and pits of snakes and every adversity. They make them lose their family, they make them lose their job, they push them to their wits' end, and then, if that person survives, the La Sombra gift them the embrace. Their enforced Darwinism, if that is not an oxymoron. Well, I think either the La Sombra gave this philosophy to the Inconnu, or the Inconnu gave it to the La Sombra many, many years ago. Because the Inconnu share this philosophy of a sort. This is my belief, that they will manufacture accidents and incidents and adversity and trial for coteries and solo kindred. And any kindred that fails, they'll just tick off the list and move on dispassionately. Oh yes, I'm sure there are some Inconnu that weep a solitary red tear, but most of them, they've seen this so many times that they can do nothing but move on to the next target. The target who does keep passing, though, the target that manages to impress, well, they get invited to the club, don't they? They get an invitation. You made it. You understand what it is to be the ultimate being. You understand what it is to be someone who has faced down the barrel of the gun and come out the other side. Not literally, that would be a strange kind of Zemishi blood brother kind of power. Anyhow, I think if I were to give you any warnings regarding the Inconnu, it really depends on how endangered you feel you are by them. If you feel that they are manipulators, if you feel like they are making your lives worse, the good news is you can take an Inconnu agent out and not see much in the way of reprisal, as far as I'm aware. Why do I think so? Well, they don't have Camarilla backing, they don't have Anarch backing, they don't have Sabat backing. They may pretend that they do, however. So here's the warning. Take an Inconnu agent's head off. On one hand, great. No one noticed they were there in the first place. On the other hand, they may have embedded themselves so deeply that they've convinced someone that they're the Primogen of Clan Ventru in this domain, and now you've got the entirety of Clan Ventru and some Camarilla agents in your domain after you, due to a case of mistaken identity, because they've all been duped and none of them are prepared to admit that they were misled. On the other hand, if you don't feel like they're interfering with your life, if you don't feel threatened by them, well, now this is where you turn the tables on the Inconnu agent, because you start watching them. You start finding out what it is they know. If you are confident that you are being watched by an Inconnu agent, then, damn it, turn the tables on them. Find out where they go. Find the morsels they are close to. Find who their allies are. I guarantee there are kindred scholars who would pay well for that kind of information. Of course, if you make an Inconnu agent suddenly pack their bags and run, now the chase is on, the game is afoot, now you're in for an adventure. Find out where that rat scurries home to. You may be facing danger doing so, but I can honestly say it would be a bit of a thrill, wouldn't it, to pursue the Inconnu back to their nest? There's all kind of talk of the Inconnu experiment failing. I mean, if an experiment takes over 3,000 years to come to fruition, it's not doing well. But there's all talk of the Elves, the Methuselahs, these great Inconnu minds in Hunadawara sacrificing souls to demons, much as they once persecuted the Brujah for doing, just so that they can maintain their sanctuary and keep pushing toward their philosophical end. But the truth is, there is no end. If there were an end to our existence, it wouldn't be a curse. And if you believe that God cursed us, and I do not, but if you believe that God cursed us, then succeeding at a few trials, grinning and bearing it, watching other vampires fail and burn, is hardly going to endear the great deity to you. You know, I once met a vampire claiming to be a representative of the Inconnu. They only claimed that after lengthy interrogation. And I said, who does the Inconnu serve? And they said, we serve the philosophy and we are purifiers. Now, there are various subsects of the Inconnu, purifiers, seekers, there are others, but either way. And I said, so you don't serve any person? And this vampire claimed, I serve Cain's will. Now, this pricked my ears up, one should say, because, of course, many Sabat claim the same thing. And I said, how do you know you serve Cain's will? And this Inconnu agent, a monitor is what they call themselves, stated, Cain was always looking for God's mercy and never understood why God just wouldn't, in his magnanimity, forgive him. Forgive Cain. You know, if God is capable of all things, why not forgive Cain? And that's what we're looking for in the Inconnu. We're looking for forgiveness. We want to find a pathway to forgiveness. And then, and this is where this vampire surprised me, after many hours of vigorous conversation, this vampire said to me, I met Cain once. And no, he wasn't driving a taxi cab. He wasn't in LA, as the rumors go. He wasn't in Berlin either. He said, I met Cain. I met Cain in the ruins of an ancient city. And Cain spoke to me, and Cain just appeared to be a weak and fragile old man. Physically, he still looked young. Physically, he was still strong. But mentally, he was broken because he never found out how it was that he could earn the Lord's forgiveness. We must all try to earn this forgiveness so that Cain may be forgiven. It's a beautiful tale, isn't it? Now, I laughed in the vampire's face and then cut that face off because I find the very idea of serving some mythical creature like Cain laughable. Truly, I do. And what's more, I find the idea of living my eternal existence in repentance for someone who may or may not have committed a murder about which I had no involvement, again, utterly monstrous. If there is a deity that expects me to do that, then that deity can, as they say, jog on. You know, I've long held the view that the Setites, the ministry, are right. Or at least they are more right than anyone who worships Cain. And why do I say this? Because they've got history on their side. You know, there are lots of scholars, biblical scholars, theologians, you know, who claim, well, this part of the Bible might have happened 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years ago. But we know for a fact through archaeology that human history goes back much farther than that. And we know that there are vampires claiming to be deities predeceasing the Old Testament and predeceasing the time, I should say preceding, the time at which Cain would have been wandering around. Now, as we know, there are vampires that are around 5,000 years of age, maybe older, or at least claiming to be. And we have an entire religion of vampires that either sprung up long after the actual worship of Set had concluded, or sprung up before the worship of Cain did, that it makes me think that once upon a time, around 3,500 years ago or so, there was a vampire who was entirely charismatic, who was incredibly interested in what became the Old Testament, who loved the stories, who lapped them up, and saw them as an effective way of influencing people. And looking through those pages, he realized the best role to play would be the first cursed man. Because just as this faith was beginning to take hold and so many mortals in the surrounding area were believing it, well, that means so many vampires were as well. And if this powerful vampire said, I am Cain, and adopted the name, then others would believe him and follow him. And ultimately, this cult failed. There is no vampire going around now with a temple in his wake called Cain, but the faith persisted. And in my view, that is all what the belief in Cain is. We have no idea who our progenitor is. We have no idea where our origins are, whether they are scientific, whether they are occult. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. But what matters to me, what bothers me, is when you have a sect like the Inconu who are so wise and could apply their knowledge, of which I am sure they have much, to genuinely bettering existence for kindred the world over. They believe this nonsense. They ruin themselves with their superstition. Therefore, I cast them into the fire, much as I do most sects and cults in these nights. The only vampires a Cainite should trust and confide in and spend their eternity with and even serve are a vampire's coterie or pack. Giving yourself to a body larger than that, the idea, misguided as it is, that you belong to any kind of society is utter foolishness. And the fact that the Inconu have attempted to act as a society for over 3,000 years and have still done nothing of note, well, I think that track record tells you all it needs to. Now, present to me an Inconu who has got incontrovertible proof that they have improved the world for the better, and I will shake their hand. But as a sect, they can, frankly, bog off. Now, I see I've got some questions from the fledglings in the auditorium. Hello, all of you. And I'm glad you enjoyed my colleague Harold Zettler's videos on werewolves, Ripper Rex. Hello. The Inconu are indeed awesome and secretive, Gara, but I wouldn't fall for their awesomeness too much. Just because they have power and they are awe-inspiring doesn't mean they're good. The Inconu could be made of any clan, Cassie, that is true, although you could argue that some clans are better fits than others. If you are a member of the ministry, for instance, and specifically a member of the Church of Set, you're unlikely to give your mind over to the Inconu. The same goes for a loyalist Giovanni or member of Clan Tremere, for instance. If your clan brings with it a certain ideology, then you're unlikely to suddenly subscribe to the Inconu. Of course, you don't just turn up at their doorstep and say, can I become a member? You have to be headhunted by the sect. So maybe they've recruited some Tremere, maybe they've recruited some Giovanni among the Hakata. I do not know. I don't have a member list, and I doubt they do. I am doing well. Someone's asked, with the Bali return, that would imply they ever existed. How am I getting on in terms of writing future games? Well, I seem to be writing pretty prolifically. Out of character briefly, I'm currently developing They Came From Classified, which is a mysterious game in the They Came From line. We have They Came From Beneath the Sea, which you can back on Drive-Thru-RPG. Buy it, in other words. There's They Came From Beyond the Grave, which is currently having its art laid out, and upcoming as They Came From Camp Murder Lake, which is the slasher movie game. I'll be running that at Virtual HorrorCon next weekend. Not this weekend, but next weekend. So yeah, doing lots of work. Is Golconda a ruse of the Inconu or a real agenda? That's a very good question, Warrior Poet. It is mostly the Inconu who have spread these rumors of Golconda. Whether they are true, whether they are essentially a way of misleading people to torture them and make them fall and see what becomes of them once they pick themselves up, that's a good question. But I have to go with the old homeopathy ideas here, that if homeopathy could cure cancer, presumably would have sold it as a cure for cancer by now, and hospitals would be using it the world over. If the Inconu had a cast iron route to Golconda, well, we'd all be on the route to Golconda, wouldn't we? Is there a link between the Inconu and the True Black Hand, asks fledgling AC Hadley. Well, I certainly hope not. These two both consider themselves the most mysterious of sects, or other vampires do. They certainly do an awful lot in the background, and the True Black Hand are somewhat active in the underworld with that. Now, I believe their goals, such as they are opposed. If you were to really look at things in black and white, the Inconu wish to make a better world, la-di-da. The True Black Hand wish to remake this world with them as servants of either the Antediluvians or Cain. So, yes. I suppose, again, it's subjective. One man's potato is another man's potato. Foot Studio Reboot says, if I'm turned into a whale for my conscious sleep paralysis by the light of a yellow full moon and gain the evil power from it, doesn't mean I'm a gangrel. No, you have to be embraced by a gangrel to be a gangrel, but good points for trying, you know? That's a good point about Solot creating the Bali, John Vladman, because all we know is the founder of the Bali's name was Asher. But Asher is both a name that has been taken by multiple antediluvians and powerful vampires, and also, according to the Inconu, a state of being. When a vampire of great power falls to the beast, they become Asher, which means that it could have been any one of the antediluvians. And so that is why sometimes you'll see the Banu Hakim blamed, sometimes you'll see the Cappadocians blamed, sometimes you'll see the Salubri blamed. It could really have been anybody. I mean, if we want to look at the science of vampirism, such as it is, the Bali were known to possess disciplines similar to those of the ministry. So maybe it was set all along. I mean, most of us blame him for everything. Witness 1 says, hello, Matthew. Having put my specific set of vampires through the hospitalities of Huna Deora, what are your thoughts on this particular source book supplement? So Lair of the Hidden is the book that covers the vampires of Huna Deora, and I think it is just one take on the Inconu. It's deliberately a secretive sect with no definitive answers, and with that in mind, Lair of the Hidden is just one face of the Inconu. Whether it's a failed face or whether it's its ultimate face, which is a failure, then that is entirely up to you. I think it works well as a story, as a confined chronicle. In fact, it probably works a lot better than some of the other published stories for pre-V5. But I don't think it has all of the answers in the Inconu, and nor should it, because the Inconu work best if they are secretive and mysterious. Umaga says, could the Inconu have so many subsects that they don't know about themselves? Absolutely. Think of it like a terrorist organization that's divided into cells. Those cells don't necessarily all speak, and they certainly don't all necessarily have a single leader. This is why it's a mistake to assume someone like Sorlot is pulling the strings of the Inconu. It's more likely that you've got a disparate group of cells that occasionally cross with each other. The thing that would interest me is if these cells cross and they have crossed philosophies, do the Inconu at that point come to blows? Many Inconu have this belief that you should never take another Canite life, such as it is, that you can defend yourself, of course, but you should never just murder another vampire. Now, if that's the case, do the Inconu just sit around a table, discuss philosophy, and go their way? I think not. I think that they are so self-satisfied and self-assured that they are just, killing off the heretics. Well, was Sorlot the first one who reached the state of Golconda, John Vladman? If he was, he probably wouldn't have been a vampire to be diablerized, would he? Would it be interesting to write a sort of World's End RPG where you play a person, you have to survive, so you hear the emergency alerts, then right to the end where everything is saved, says Stu the Man. I have actually written such a game, which is called Apocalypse. I think this was before Power by the Apocalypse, in fact, which starts with the nuclear air raid sirens going, set in the early 1970s. It's very bleak. It's based around the TV series Threads, the James Herbert novel Domain, and other such things that handle a nuclear attack on Britain. What are your speculations of Urshulgi? What would you say is his end game? I would hate to speculate about Urshulgi because you might hear me, but there are a few vampires so powerful that are active in these nights, if indeed he is still active. There is every possibility that he is the founder of the Bali. He may even be an embraced demon in human form. So, yes, lots of possibilities surround Urshulgi, and you should use him sparingly. Mr. Flippy Bob, thank you very much for sending me $2 for this lesson. However, as I've pointed out on other videos, sending me money on YouTube really results in it going nowhere. I have no idea where this money goes, and I don't think I can claim it. So don't send money to Google. If you need to send me money, and I always appreciate money, I have a Patreon linked below, which allows you to join my Discord, or back and request videos, or if you just want to send me money freestyle, go on MatthewDawkins.com. There is a button on there for buy me a cup of tea. You can send me as much as you like. So we've got a couple of more questions I will answer here. We don't buy into this entire dark-skinned curse of the Banu Hakim in this edition. Thank you. I find it dreadful, and I have met many a Banu Hakim who has not grown increasingly dark with age. I think it was just a myth, just a rumor, and thankfully no longer a thing. But yes, I do appreciate people putting money down. Now, as I've got everyone's attention, and there's quite a few people watching, once again, I have linked below the latest Kickstarter that I'm not involved in, actually, but the latest Kickstarter I'm excited about is for Scion Dragon and Scion Masks of the Mythos. You don't have to back both, you can back one or the other, but they are both fantastic games set in the Scion universe where you play the children of gods, such as Poseidon and Loki and Tezcatlipoca and Amaterasu and so on. Whichever gods you so wish. There's lots of pantheons in there. Dragon is what makes it a fantasy game, and Master of the Mythos is what makes it a horror game, of course, of the Cthulhu mythos variety. Fancy playing a child of Nyarlathotep or Tsathoggua? Or I don't know if Tsathoggua in it, actually. But there are lots of great old ones in there. These games are fantastic. The art is brilliant. Please do check that Kickstarter out. The reason I've linked it in this video, which is otherwise about vampires, because there's only a week left to back. It's done so well, but you really should check it out. It's looking like a fantastic pair of games. Their curse, Gara, has for a very long time been surrounding their feeding. So for quite a while, the Banu Hakim were known as the Assamites, and their curse revolved around things like they could not either diablerize other vampires, or they were addicted to diablerie from other vampires, things like that. There's a new curse, a new clan bane for V5, in fact. So Warrior Poet says, as the Inconu are rumoured to be involved in the fall of Constantinople, not just rumoured, I think they were almost certainly involved, could the entire jihad be a project for the Inconu? I would hope not, because the jihad is such a messy vehicle of chaos that if they are controlling it, that means they have far more power than anyone really understands. Certainly, it's possible they've lit a number of fuses that have started a number of major events among Kindred Society and its major players, but I don't think they manipulate every single thing in the eternal struggle. Okay, our last couple of questions. What's the reason behind the changes of clan names, especially the Setites? Can't find a link to the connection to the new names. So the followers of Set became known as the Ministry due to an internal rebrand once a lot of their Hierophants disappeared, and also due to the fact that they were embracing a lot of people who it was quite difficult to persuade should worship Sutek, the ancient Egyptian god. To put it another way, from an out-of-character perspective, a lot of people didn't want to play automatic cultists or vampires who automatically had the name followers in the title. Follower implies your second tier, and the Ministry implies the clan of faith, which is what the followers of Set have always been, but also allows you to worship lots of other gods that ultimately lead to Set. Set is still the big kahuna, still the antediluvian, if you like, but there are many roads that lead to him, and that's where the Ministry comes in. The Church of Set still exists. There's still the Orthodoxy, so there's that. The Banu Hakim changed to the Banu Hakim because, quite frankly, it's a better translation for what the Assamites would call themselves, and Assamites is a little bit insulting. The Hecata, as they point out in Cults of the Blood Gods, well, the clan wasn't always called the Giovanni. The clan wasn't always called the Cappadocians, because Cappadocia, the location, didn't always exist. What were they called before that? Probably not the Hecata. But the point is that clans go through many changes across the course of the centuries. And now that the hierarchy of clan Hecata, or the clan of death, has changed, so has the name. So hopefully that makes sense. I haven't managed to continue the Tokyo Noir Chronicle Schrodinger's Cat because I was intending on doing so, but then COVID happened, people couldn't fly places safely, and so that went that way. Thank you very much for supporting Scion John. If you could post on the Kickstarter that you were directed there by Matthew Dawkins, or just say, hey, I found out about this through Matthew Dawkins' video, that helps me. I don't get paid for it, I don't get credit for it, but it helps me because I get to find out whether saying things like this actually influence people, you know? So by all means, just leave a comment on the Kickstarter, happily to say, hey, found out about this through Matthew Dawkins. It helps me. So let's see. I think we will go with one more question from Mystical Mountains. Why did White Wolf do away with the fantastic history of the vampires and clowns with the new editions? They haven't. The history is exactly the same as it always has been. Nothing in the vampire history, as far as I'm aware, has been retconned, so I'm not sure what you're talking about. The clans are all still there. The playable options all still exist. The meta plot hasn't changed. It's just moved on over 20 years, which one would think it would, because Gehenna happened 20 years ago, at least the Gehenna source book. And that means certain things have happened in the 2 decades following. And those are what you see in V5. It makes sense that things have moved on. Things have not been eliminated, unless it was something that was absolutely badly written or offensive, you know? So, yeah. All right. I think that is going to be it from me. So thank you very much, everybody, for watching. I do hope that has been a useful video. Thank you very much, Daniel, for paying for this video. And if anyone else is interested in finding out more about Vampire the Masquerade and getting me to make more videos on any subject to do with World of Darkness or any role-playing game, frankly, do check out my Patreon links below. You can back it, request videos, and I will make them. Thank you very much for watching. You've been a lovely audience.